For 31 nights straight, I walked Maya Bennett to her car in the parking garage across from our office. And for 31 nights straight, neither of us called it anything. On the 32nd night, I stayed late to help a client whose server had melted down at 9 p.m., and by the time I looked up from my desk, she was already gone. No goodbye, no knock on my cubicle wall, nothing. I told myself it was fine. I told myself a lot of things that week that weren't true. Then, at 10:47 p.m., my phone buzzed on the desk beside my cold coffee. 3 words. I noticed. My name is Ryan Castellano. I'm 36. I work in commercial insurance underwriting, which is exactly as thrilling as it sounds. And up until about 2 months before any of this happened, my life had settled into the kind of quiet that people mistake for contentment because it's easier than admitting it's just absence wearing a nicer coat. I'd been divorced for 3 years. Not a messy one. Not the kind with slammed doors and lawyers who send calendar invites just to remind you they exist. Just 2 people who got married a little too young and grew into 2 different people who happened to still share a mortgage. Her name was Kristen. She moved to Denver with a guy from her running club. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with a mattress on the floor for the first 4 months because buying a bed frame felt like admitting the situation was permanent. Eventually, I bought the bed frame. That's about as much healing as I'd done by the time Maya Bennett walked into my life carrying 2 boxes of files and wearing an expression like she already regretted every decision that had led her to this building. She started in March, transferred over from our Sacramento office after some reorganization nobody in leadership could explain without 3 follow-up emails. She got the desk 2 rows over from mine, the one by the window that everyone avoided because the blinds never closed all the way and the afternoon sun turned your monitor into a mirror. Maya didn't complain about it. She just angled her chair and got on with her life, which turned out to be one of the first things I noticed about her. She didn't perform frustration for an audience. She just solved the problem in front of her and moved to the next one. She was 32. Dark hair she wore in a low bun that somehow always looked intentional even on the days she swore she'd overslept. Sharp brown eyes that missed nothing in a meeting, and a laugh that came out sideways, like it surprised her every time. She was sharp in the way people are when they've had to be. Not cold. Sharp like a good knife, useful, precise, never wasted on the wrong thing. We were friendly the way new coworkers are friendly, borrowed stapler, complained about the same printer, the standard currency of office civility. I didn't think much more about it than that. I want to be honest about that part, because if I dress it up as some instant lightning bolt thing, I'd be lying to you, and this story doesn't need the lie to be good. The parking garage thing started by accident, the way most important things in my life apparently insist on starting. It was a Tuesday in early April, close to 8 p.m., long past when reasonable people leave an insurance office, but we'd both been buried under the same renewal season that eats every underwriter alive every spring. I packed up first, walked out through the side exit toward the garage, and heard footsteps behind me picking up pace like someone trying not to look like they were hurrying. I glanced back. Maya, laptop bag over one shoulder, keys already out and gripped between her fingers the way women grip keys when they've been told enough times by enough people to be careful, even in a garage with working lights and cameras every 20 feet. "Hey," I said, slowing down without really deciding to. "Hey." She caught up, a little out of breath. Didn't realize anyone else was still here. Server renewal season. Cruel and unusual. Understatement of the century. She fell into step beside me, and for a second neither of us said anything, just the echo of our shoes against concrete and the hum of a fluorescent light 2 rows down that had been flickering since before I started working there. "You parked on 3? I asked. "3. You? 2. So this is where we split up like it's the 3rd act of a heist movie." I laughed, actual laugh, the first one that day probably. "I'll walk you up. Nobody should be alone in this garage after dark. I've seen the security footage emails. Half the break-ins in this city happen in structures exactly like this one." She gave me a look, part amused, part assessing, like she was deciding whether that was a line or an actual concern. I understood the look. I'd have given it too, if the roles were reversed. You don't have to do that. I know. I'm doing it anyway. That was it. That was the whole beginning of the thing that would eventually rearrange my entire life. Not a declaration, not a moment lit by anything more dramatic than bad fluorescent lighting. Just a man walking a coworker up one extra flight of stairs because it seemed like the decent thing to do, and he didn't examine it much past that. The next night, I did it again. And the night after that. Within a week and a half, it wasn't even a question anymore. If we were both leaving after dark, and in renewal season that was most nights, I walked her to her car. She started timing her exit around mine without ever admitting that's what she was doing, and I started finding reasons to linger near the elevator around 7:45 without admitting that's what I was doing either. We built an entire unspoken choreography out of it. Neither of us named it. That was the rule we never actually agreed to, but somehow both followed with the discipline of people terrified of jinxing something they weren't ready to look at directly. The conversations on those walks became the best part of my day, and I don't say that lightly, because for 3 years my days hadn't exactly been overflowing with competition for that title. We talked about everything and nothing. She told me about her older brother, a Marine stationed overseas who called twice a month and texted her memes the other 28 days like that counted as staying in touch. She told me she'd once tried to become a runner, bought the shoes, the app, the moisture-wicking everything, and lasted exactly 11 days before deciding that hatred of a hobby that intense probably meant something. I told her about the divorce eventually, not all at once, in pieces, the way men my age tend to hand out our worst chapters like we're worried the whole book will be too heavy if we give it away at once. Denver, she repeated, the night I finally told her where Kristen ended up. That's rude. She couldn't even pick a city that makes you feel better about it. Denver's nice. That's what I said. Did you say it to her? Or just to yourself in the shower at 2 a.m.? The second one. She laughed, that sideways laugh, and bumped my shoulder lightly with hers as we crossed toward the stairwell. For what it's worth, her loss doesn't feel like a controversial legal opinion to have. Careful. That almost sounded like a compliment. I contain multitudes. That was Maya. Quick, a little sharp-edged, but never cruel with it, and somehow always leaving me a half step lighter than I'd been before the walk started. I started noticing things I probably shouldn't have let myself notice yet. The way she twisted her hair up higher when she was stressed about a deadline. The exact rhythm of her laugh when something actually got her, versus the polite one she gave clients on the phone. The fact that she always checked her mirrors twice before pulling out of her spot, a habit I clocked without asking about, and didn't ask about, because some things you learn not to press on until someone hands them to you themselves. About 2 weeks in, I learned why she gripped her keys like that. We were on the third-floor landing, later than usual, close to 9, when her phone buzzed in her bag. She glanced at it, and something in her face changed just slightly, a tightening around the eyes I hadn't seen from her before. She put the phone away without answering. You okay? Fine. She said it too fast, which is usually the tell that someone isn't. I didn't push. I've learned the hard way that pushing rarely gets you closer to the truth. It just teaches people to hide it better. So I let it sit, and we kept walking, and when we reached her car she paused with her hand on the door and said, quieter than her usual register, ex-boyfriend. He doesn't love that I moved offices without giving him a change of address. You don't owe him one. I know that. He apparently disagrees. She unlocked the car, then looked at me properly. It's not dangerous, just annoying. Persistent. The kind of guy who thinks caring enough about something means he's entitled to it. I filed that away. I didn't say anything dramatic, didn't puff my chest out and offer to go find the guy, because that's not who I am, and also because Maya struck me immediately as someone who'd find that kind of performance more insulting than reassuring. I just said, then I'll keep walking you up. Not because I think you can't handle him. Because nobody should have to handle anything alone in a parking garage at 9 p.m. if they don't have to. She looked at me for a second too long. That's a good answer. I've had a month of practice. 3 weeks. I round up when it makes me sound more reliable. That earned the Real laugh, the one that surprised her every time. And she got in her car, and I watched until her taillights cleared the exit ramp before I walked back to my own. The way I'd started doing without deciding to. The way a habit becomes a routine becomes, eventually, something closer to a promise nobody's said out loud yet. His name. I learned over the following weeks in fragments Maya let slip when she was tired enough to stop editing herself, was Derek Voss. They'd dated a little over a year, and from what she described, he was the kind of man who was charming enough in public that people found her complaints about him a little confusing when she made them, which of course was exactly the point. He didn't yell. He didn't do anything that showed up cleanly on a police report. He just texted constantly in the guise of concern, showed up in places that were technically public but suspiciously specific, and had a talent for making every boundary she set sound like an overreaction on her part rather than a reasonable request on his. He told my old office manager I'd been struggling mentally since we broke up. She told me one night, staring straight ahead at the garage's concrete pillars instead of at me, like it was easier to say to the wall, so that if I ever said anything about him, people would already have a story ready that made me sound unreliable. He's very good at building the story before you even know you need a defense. I felt something cold settle in my chest, the specific kind of anger that doesn't have anywhere to go because the target hasn't actually done anything you can point to yet. That's not concern. That's a strategy. I know. She glanced at me. Most people don't clock that as fast as you just did. I underwrite risk for a living. I'm annoyingly good at spotting the version of events somebody's building in advance. That got a small, real smile out of her, tired around the edges but real. Occupational hazard. Comforting, somehow. We kept walking, kept talking. The month rolled on, week 3 sliding into week 4, and somewhere in there, without either of us marking the exact date, it stopped being a habit and became a thing I structured my whole workday around without quite admitting that to myself. I started leaving my afternoon coffee run for later, so I'd still be caffeinated enough to seem normal at 7:45. I started noticing which nights she seemed more tired, which nights something had gone sideways with a client, which nights she needed the conversation to be light, and which nights she needed someone to just walk quietly beside her and let the day settle. 31 nights. I counted afterward, obviously, the way you always count after the fact, once a thing has become significant enough to deserve an inventory. 31 nights of the same walk, the same stairwell, the same low hum of that one flickering light on level 2 that maintenance never fixed. 31 nights of learning a person one 5-minute walk at a time, which is a strange way to fall for someone, in installments, but maybe the most honest way there is, because you can't perform anything for 5 minutes a night for a month. Eventually, the real version of you shows up, tired and unguarded, and either that's enough or it isn't. For me, it was enough somewhere around night 19. I didn't say anything. I told myself there was time. I told myself a lot of things that month. Night 32 was the one I didn't walk her. It wasn't dramatic. There was no fight, no forgetting, nothing you could point to as a mistake in the way people usually mean that word. A client's server infrastructure had a catastrophic failure at 6:40, the kind of emergency that turns a normal Thursday into 6 people huddled around a conference room speakerphone until well past 9, arguing with an IT vendor in another time zone who kept insisting the fix was basically done every 15 minutes for 2 hours. I was head down the entire time, phone buzzing with internal messages I didn't have the bandwidth to check, laptop balanced on my knees, coffee gone cold beside 3 other cold coffees from earlier attempts. By the time the fire was out enough to breathe, it was 10:40. I packed up on autopilot, walked out through the side exit, and it wasn't until I was 3 steps into the garage stairwell, keys already in hand, that the absence hit me. No footsteps behind me picking up pace. No hey, didn't realize anyone else was still here. Just my own echo, and the flickering light on level 2, and a silence that felt considerably heavier than it had any right to feel after only one missed night. I told myself she'd left hours ago. Reasonable people don't stay past 10 during a server meltdown they're not even assigned to. I told myself this wasn't the kind of thing that meant anything. That a month of walking someone to her car doesn't create an obligation. That missing one night because of an actual work emergency was about as understandable as excuses come. I still felt like I'd forgotten something important, like I'd left the stove on somewhere in my own chest. I got to my car, sat there a minute longer than I needed to, and drove home in a kind of quiet I didn't examine closely enough at the time. I microwaved something forgettable, sat on my couch, and somewhere around 10:47, my phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. Maya Bennett. I noticed. That was it. No punctuation beyond the period, no explanation, no emoji to soften it into something easily dismissed as a joke. Just those two words sitting on my screen like they'd been waiting all night for their moment. I stared at it longer than I'd admit to anyone in a normal conversation. My first instinct, embarrassingly, was panic, the specific kind that comes from being caught at something you didn't know you were doing until someone names it back to you. My second instinct was something warmer, something that had been quietly building in me for a month and had just been handed permission to stop pretending it wasn't there. I typed 3 different responses and deleted 2 of them. The first was too flippant, some joke about the server meltdown that would have buried the actual moment under humor the way I usually did when things got close to something real. The second was too much, too fast, a whole paragraph that read like a man who'd been waiting for exactly this opening for 3 weeks, which, to be fair, was accurate. But accuracy isn't always the same as good judgment at 11 at night. What I sent instead was, server meltdown. 6 people, 1 very stubborn vendor, and I completely lost track of time. I'm sorry. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. The universal sign of someone drafting and redrafting the way I just had. Maya, you don't have to apologize. It's not like you signed a contract. Me. Felt like I broke one anyway. A longer pause this time. I watched the dots start and stopped twice before her reply finally landed. Maya. I waited by the elevator for 20 minutes before I left. Told myself I wasn't doing that. Did it anyway. Something in my chest turned over, slow and complete, like a key finally finding the right lock after weeks of trying the wrong ones. Me. Why didn't you text me? I would have come find you the second that call ended. Maya. Because if I texted you, I'd have to admit I was waiting. And if I admitted that, I'd have to admit why. I sat with that for a second, phone warm in my hand, my own heartbeat doing something embarrassingly teenage in a chest that was supposedly 36 years old and past all this. Me. Why were you waiting, Maya? The dots appeared and vanished 4 separate times before her answer finally came through, and when it didn't dodge the question the way I half expected her to. Maya. Because somewhere in the last month, walking to my car stopped being about feeling safe in a parking garage and started being the best 5 minutes of my day. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I just kept showing up and letting you walk me up like it was normal, because as long as neither of us said anything, I didn't have to be scared of what happens if you don't feel the same way. I read it twice, then a third time, slower, letting each sentence land where it was clearly meant to land. Me. I've felt the same way since about night 19. I just told myself there was time to say something eventually. Tonight kind of ruined that plan for me. Maya, how? Me. Because I found out what it feels like to miss something I didn't even know I'd start counting on. And I didn't love the answer. There was a longer pause after that, long enough that I started second-guessing whether I'd pushed too hard, said too much, ruined a month of careful, unspoken choreography with one honest paragraph typed too fast on a Thursday night. Then my phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't a text. It was a call. I answered before the first ring finished. Hey, hey. Her voice was quieter than I usually heard it, stripped of the sharp confidence she wore like armor most days at the office. I don't want to do this over text anymore. Okay. I also don't want to wait until tomorrow to say the rest of it, because I've spent an entire month being careful, and careful got me sitting by an elevator for 20 minutes tonight feeling like an idiot. You're not an idiot. I know that logically. Emotionally, I was fully prepared to never mention it, and just let this become the world's longest unspoken thing. A breath, shaky, The kind that comes before someone says something they've been holding on to for a while. Ryan, I like you. I've liked you probably since around the same time you apparently started counting nights, which is either very sweet or very concerning that we were both keeping a private tally. I laughed, and it came out relieved, lighter than anything I'd felt in longer than a month. For the record, I wasn't keeping a formal tally. It just became obvious in hindsight. Comforting. I like you too, Maya. I have for weeks. I kept telling myself I'd say something eventually, and then tonight happened and eventually stopped feeling like an acceptable plan. Silence on the line for a second, but a different kind than before, not tense, just full. The kind of silence two people share right after they've said the true thing out loud and are both letting it settle into the room around them. So what happens now? She asked finally. Now I show up tomorrow at 7:45 like always, except this time we both admit that's what we're doing on purpose. That's a start. And then maybe I take you to dinner somewhere that isn't a parking garage stairwell, because as much as I've enjoyed a month of concrete and flickering fluorescent lighting, I think you deserve slightly better ambience. That got the Rael laugh, the sideways one, warm through the phone. Mabel would be jealous to hear you talk about the stairwell like that. Then, catching herself, sorry, wrong story, force of habit, I read too much online. I have no idea what that means, but I'm choosing to take it as a compliment. You should. We talked for another hour after that. Easy in a way that surprised me given how much had just shifted underneath us, the kind of conversation that doesn't need a script because both people have finally stopped performing and started just talking. When we hung up, it was well past midnight, and I lay there in the dark feeling lighter than I had in 3 years, which is a strange thing to realize you've been missing until someone hands it back to you. The next morning at the office was its own kind of comedy. Neither of us said anything different in front of coworkers, both of us apparently agreeing without discussing it that this was ours before it belonged to anyone else's commentary. But there was a new current running under everything, small things. The way she caught my eye across the conference room during a meeting and had to look down at her notes to keep from smiling. The way I found an excuse to walk past her desk twice as many times as strictly necessary. Our coworker Priya, who missed nothing, caught it by lunchtime. You two are being weird, she said, sliding into the seat across from me in the break room, arms crossed like she was settling in for an interrogation. We're not being weird. Ryan, you've refilled your coffee 3 times in the last hour, and you haven't drunk any of it. That's not a caffeine habit. That's a man finding excuses to walk past someone's desk. I didn't answer, which was answer enough, and Priya's grin told me she already knew exactly what that silence meant. That night, 7:45 came, and for the first time in 33 days I didn't pretend I was casually leaving at the same time as Maya by coincidence. I walked straight to her desk. Ready? She looked up, something warm flickering behind her eyes. You're early. I'm motivated. That's new. I had a good night's sleep for once. Turns out honesty is restful. We walked to the garage together, and the conversation on the way up felt different, lighter somehow. The weight of a month of unspoken things finally set down where we could both see it clearly. At her car, she didn't get in right away. She turned to face me instead, keys still in hand out of habit, though I noticed she wasn't gripping them the way she used to. Dinner Saturday? I asked. Somewhere with actual lighting and chairs that aren't attached to concrete. I have very high standards for a first real date, Ryan. I hope you know that. I underwrite risk for a living. I'm comfortable with high standards. That earned the laugh, and she finally got in her car, and I watched her taillights clear the exit ramp the way I always had. Except this time I was smiling the whole walk back to my own car, because for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, the ending of the night didn't feel like an ending at all. It felt like the start of something I'd been circling for a month without letting myself land on it. Saturday came, and I picked her up instead of meeting her somewhere, because after a month of walking her safely to a car, driving her somewhere in mind felt like the natural continuation of the same instinct. She answered her door in a deep green dress, hair down for once instead of pinned up, and something in my chest did a slow, Complete turn at the sight of her looking like herself with nothing to armor against that night. "You look nice," I said, which felt criminally insufficient the second it left my mouth. "You look nervous." "I am nervous. I've been walking you to your car for a month building up to this, and I'm suddenly worried I've built it up too much in my own head." "You haven't." She smiled, stepping past me toward my car. "For what it's worth, I've been building it up in mine too." Dinner was easy in the way good things sometimes surprise you by being easy. No awkward silences, no performing. Just two people who'd already spent a month learning each other in 5-minute installments finally getting the space to stretch that out into hours. She told me more about her brother, about growing up the daughter of two teachers who valued curiosity over comfort, about the year she almost moved to Chicago for a job before deciding the city scared her more than staying scared her. I told her about the parts of the divorce I hadn't said yet, the quiet parts, the part where the worst moment wasn't the day Kristen left, but the year after, learning how to be a person again in an apartment that didn't have her stuff in it anymore. "I think that's the part people don't warn you about," Maya said, turning her wine glass slowly by the stem. "Not the leaving, the relearning how to exist in the space after. You sound like you've done that relearning yourself." She was quiet for a second. "Derek wasn't just annoying after we broke up. He made the year during feel like relearning too. Like I was constantly recalibrating what normal meant, because his version of normal kept shifting to whatever made him look reasonable and me look difficult." "You're not difficult. I know that now." Took me longer than I'd like to admit. I reached across the table, not grabbing her hand, just resting mine near hers, close enough that she could close the distance if she wanted to. She did, fingers threading through mine like it was the easiest decision she'd made all year. "For what it's worth," I said, "the version of you I've gotten in a month of 5-minute walks has never once struck me as difficult. Sharp, yes. Occasionally terrifying in a meeting. Never difficult. Careful. That's dangerously close to romantic. I contain multitudes." She laughed, the real one, and something settled fully into place in my chest that had been slowly assembling itself for a month without my permission. Derek Voss did not disappear from the picture quietly, because men like that rarely do. About 3 weeks into Maya and I officially being together, though we hadn't announced anything at the office beyond letting people draw their own accurate conclusions, he showed up in the parking garage on a Wednesday night, leaning against her car like he had every right to be standing there. I saw him before she did. Tall, expensive-looking jacket for a man in a concrete garage, the kind of practiced casual stance that told me immediately he'd rehearsed this moment more than once in his head before executing it. Maya stopped walking the second she spotted him, her hand tightening on my arm. "Derek," she said, voice flat in a way I hadn't heard from her before, all the warmth I'd gotten used to instantly gone. "Maya." He didn't look at me at first, which told me plenty. "You changed your number. That was the point. We need to talk. Alone." His eyes flicked to me then, dismissive in the specific way men like that dismiss anyone standing between them and what they've decided they're owed. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me the second you're standing next to her car uninvited," I said, keeping my voice level, because I'd learned a long time ago that anger performed loudly gives men like Derek exactly the reaction they're fishing for. "You should leave." I wasn't asking your opinion. I wasn't offering it as an option. Something flickered across his face, that specific crack that shows up when a man used to being smoothly in control suddenly finds himself not. "Maya, you're seriously replacing me with whatever this is." "There's no replacing you, Derek," Maya said, and her voice had gone from flat to something colder, sharper, the tone I imagined she used in negotiations she didn't intend to lose. "You have to be something to someone before you can be replaced. You stopped being that a long time ago. You just refused to notice. That's not fair." "No," I said, stepping slightly forward, not aggressive, just present. "What's not fair is showing up at her workplace after she's changed her number, clearly trying to catch her off guard in a parking structure at night. That's not a conversation. That's a strategy. And it's the kind of strategy that gets people a restraining order if it keeps happening." Derek's jaw tightened. He looked at Maya one more time, some last attempt at whatever leverage he thought his presence still held, and found nothing there to work with. Her expression hadn't cracked once. "This isn't over," he said, which is the kind of line that sounds a lot more menacing in a movie than it does from a man backing slowly toward the exit ramp while two people watch him do it without flinching. "It is, though," Maya said quietly, once he'd gone far enough not to hear it. "It's been over for months. He's just the last one to notice." I put a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You okay?" "I will be." She let out a breath, some of the tension leaving her frame. "Thank you for not making that about you being the hero. I've had enough men make my problems about their own performance. I underwrite risk. I know the difference between de-escalating a situation and turning it into theater." That got a small, tired smile out of her. Occupational hazard. Comforting again. We reported the incident to building security that night, and Maya followed up with HR the next day, more out of thoroughness than fear, and Derek never showed up in that garage again. Whatever story he'd built about himself in his own head, apparently even he understood when a door had actually closed. Things between Maya and me only deepened from there. We stopped hiding it at the office sometime around month 2, not with an announcement, just by existing normally in front of people who'd already guessed anyway. Priya took full credit for calling it from day one, which was generous revisionist history on her part, but we let her have it. We moved in together 8 months later, into a place with actual parking, a real garage with real lighting, and Maya still teased me for checking the exits out of habit every time we walked to the car together, old muscle memory neither of us fully let go of. A year after the night she texted me those 2 words, I took her back to that same office garage on a Thursday evening after almost everyone else had gone home. I told her I needed to grab something from my old desk, which wasn't technically a lie, since what I needed to grab was in the top drawer, small and velvet, and entirely unrelated to underwriting. We walked up to level 2, past the same flickering light that maintenance still hadn't fixed, and I stopped her there, in the exact spot where I'd first told her nobody should be alone in a garage after dark. "You're being weird," she said, echoing Priya without knowing it. "We don't need anything from your desk. You cleaned that out months ago when you switched departments." "I know. Then why are we?" I got down on one knee before she finished the sentence, and whatever she'd been about to say dissolved into a sharp breath instead. "I've walked you to this car more nights than I can count at this point," I said. And somewhere in that first month, before either of us admitted anything out loud, I already knew I wanted to keep doing it for a lot longer than a few weeks. I want to keep doing it for the rest of my life, Maya. I want to be the person who notices when you're not okay before you have to spell it out. I want to be the person you don't have to sit by an elevator waiting for, because I'll already be there. She had a hand pressed over her mouth, eyes bright in the dim fluorescent light. "Ryan, marry me." It didn't take her long to answer, not the way it hadn't taken her long to say okay in that first month either, once she'd finally let herself stop being careful. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time in that specific way people do when the moment is too big to hold on to with just one emotion. "Yes, obviously yes, you enormous dramatic underwriter." I slid the ring on, and she pulled me up and kissed me right there on level 2, next to the same flickering light, in the same garage where all of this had started with nothing more than a man deciding a coworker shouldn't walk to her car alone. We got married the following spring, small ceremony, close friends, Priya delivering a maid of honor speech that somehow worked in 3 separate references to how obvious we'd both been for a full month before admitting it to ourselves. Maya's brother flew in from overseas for it, walked her down the aisle, and told me afterward, with the blunt honesty only a Marine sibling can deliver, that if I ever gave her a reason to sit by an elevator waiting again, he'd hear about it eventually. I told him he wouldn't need to worry about that. Derek never resurfaced. Some stories don't need a dramatic ending, just a door that quietly and permanently stays shut. These days, we don't work at the same office anymore. Maya moved departments a while back, but some habits don't need a shared parking garage to survive. Whenever we're out somewhere after dark, I still walk a half step closer than strictly necessary, still glance toward the exits out of an instinct that started with nothing more than good manners and somehow became the entire architecture of my life. And every so often, usually late at night when neither of us can sleep, Maya will bring up that Thursday, the one night I didn't walk her, the one text that cracked a whole month open at once. Best 2 words I ever sent, she told me once, head on my shoulder, ring catching the lamplight. Best missed night of my life, I told her back. Turns out sometimes the thing that finally makes you say something out loud isn't the moment everything's going right. It's the one night it doesn't, and you realize exactly how much you'd miss it if it just quietly stopped. So tell me, would you have said something sooner, or would you have kept quietly walking her to her car every night, waiting for someone else to make the first move? And has there ever been a small routine in your life that turned out to be carrying a lot more weight than you let yourself admit at the time? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.